My heel caught air, and suddenly the world tilted wrong. My body pitched forward, and the stairwell became a blur of gray concrete and cold steel railings. I hit the third step with my shin, sharp pain shot up my leg. Then my elbow cracked against the edge of another step, and my shoulder slammed into the wall. Everything stopped. I lay there, tasting copper in my mouth, my breath coming in short gasps. Above me, my boss stood frozen at the top of the stairs. His mouth hung open, and his hand was still extended from where he'd shoved me. For 3 seconds, neither of us moved. Then his face changed. The shock disappeared, replaced by something cold and calculated. He leaned over the railing and hissed down at me, "Fix the transfer documentation, or this gets a whole lot worse for you." His voice echoed in the empty stairwell. I pressed my hand against my ribs and felt something tender there. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. My phone had skidded across the landing, screen down. I looked up at him, and in that moment, I decided something important. The story would start right here, right now, with the truth. My name is Tessa Clark, and I need to tell you exactly how we ended up in that stairwell. I worked as a senior payment processor at Hartwell Financial. My job was simple. Keep the payment queue running smooth, no mistakes, no shortcuts. Every single wire transfer, over $10,000, needed 4 eyes on it before approval. That was the rule, and I followed it like my life depended on it. The $59,000 transfer that started all this trouble? That wasn't my mistake. I never approved it. My name wasn't on the authorization log. When I ran the audit trail that morning, I found his login credentials all over the approval timestamp. He was the one who pushed it through after hours, bypassing the safety protocols we'd spent years building. That afternoon, he called me into his office and closed the door. He slid a printed document across his desk and told me to backdate my approval notes to match his timeline. He wanted me to rewrite history and make it look like I'd signed off on the transfer. "Just a small administrative fix," he said, smiling. I stared at that paper and realized what he was really asking. He wanted me to take the fall. The urgent care clinic smelled like antiseptic and burnt coffee. A nurse with tired eyes led me to an exam room and asked what happened. I told her the truth. My boss pushed me down the stairs at work. She didn't gasp or look shocked. She just nodded and started documenting. She photographed the bruises blooming purple across my shin and the scrape on my elbow that was still bleeding through the paper towel I'd been pressing against it. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, and I watched her type the words "fall after shove by supervisor," like she was recording the weather. My hands were shaking in my lap, but I kept my voice steady. I asked her to email the discharge summary to my personal account, not my work email. She paused, looked at me for a long moment, then nodded again. The doctor came in and pressed carefully along my ribs. I winced when he touched the left side. "Possible bruised rib," he said. "You'll need to rest and ice it." He handed me papers and a prescription for pain medication. I folded everything into my purse. Pain, I was learning, made everything simpler. You couldn't argue with a bruise. You could only document it and move forward. Back at my apartment, I spread everything out on my kitchen table like I was preparing for war. I pulled up screenshots of the batch run from last Monday, the one that showed the $59,000 transfer. My approval column was completely blank. His login stamp was right there at 11:47 p.m., long after I'd gone home. I saved the screenshot 3 different ways: on a thumb drive, in my cloud storage, and on an external hard drive I kept in my bedroom closet. Then I found the Slack message he'd sent me 2 days ago. "Need you to fix the metadata on the Grayson transfer. Make it match the timeline." I took a screenshot of that too. My hands had stopped shaking now. I was thinking clearly, methodically, the way I approached payment processing. Every transaction needed a paper trail. So did this. I drafted an email to HR and another one to legal. I kept the language simple and factual. I attached the screenshots and wrote a clear subject line: "Preservation notice, stairwell B security footage request." I set the emails to send automatically at 6 in the morning. Then I took 2 pain pills, iced my ribs, and tried to sleep. Morning arrived with coffee and a dull ache in my chest every time I breathed too deep. I watched my phone as 6 a.m. rolled around, and both emails whooshed into the void. Sent. No going back now. At 8:30 a.m., I walked into the office like nothing had changed. People glanced at me, then looked away quickly. News traveled fast in a place like this. I went straight to facilities and filed a formal request for the security footage from Stairwell B. The guy at the desk, Tom, I think his name was, scratched his head and said he'd check on camera access and get back to me. I smiled and thanked him, but I made sure to note the date and time of my request in my phone. Then I went to HR and filled out an incident report. The form had a small box for describing what happened. I wrote carefully. At approximately 10:42 p.m. last night, I was in Stairwell B when my supervisor pushed my shoulder, causing me to fall down 3 steps. I sustained injuries requiring urgent care treatment. I watched those words sit on the page like a small bomb, ticking quietly. The HR rep, Miranda, looked pale as she took the form from me. By lunch, he summoned me to his office. His door was closed, blinds drawn. He gestured to the chair across from his desk like we were about to have a friendly chat. "Tessa, let's get on the same page here," he started, leaning back in his chair with forced casualness. "Your shoes were slippery, right? Old building. Those stairs can be dangerous." He slid a printed document across the desk. It was a corrected incident timeline with my name typed at the bottom, ready for my signature. According to his version, I'd simply slipped because of worn-out heels and poor lighting. No mention of his hands on my shoulder. No mention of the argument about the transfer. I looked at the paper, then at him. His smile was tight, trying to look reassuring, but missing by a mile. I didn't touch the document. I slid it back across the desk with one finger, leaving it in the space between us. "That's not what happened," I said quietly. His smile cracked and fell away. What replaced it was honest for the first time in days. Pure panic. His eyes darted to the door, then back to me. "You're making a mistake," he said. I stood up, my ribs protesting. "No," I answered. "I'm correcting one." Word traveled through the office faster than any email could. By mid-afternoon, my desk phone rang. It was Kara from accounting, her voice low and urgent. "Tessa, are you okay? I heard something happened." I kept my answer short. "Working on it," I typed back, switching to Slack, where the messages felt less permanent, less traceable. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, she sent me a screenshot I hadn't seen before. It was a message he'd sent her at 9:47 p.m. 2 nights ago, right around the time the transfer went through. "Need that batch note moved to yesterday's log. Can you adjust the timestamp?" My heart kicked against my bruised ribs. He'd tried to rope Kara into covering his tracks too. She'd apparently ignored the message, but she'd kept the screenshot. "I didn't do it," she wrote, "but I saved this just in case. Do you need it?" I stared at my screen, feeling something loosen in my chest. I wasn't alone in this. He'd made enough people nervous that they'd started building their own paper trails. "Yes," I typed back. "Send it to my personal email?" Within 30 seconds, it landed in my inbox. I saved it alongside everything else. I was leaving through the side entrance that evening when Mr. Alvarez, the night janitor, stopped me near the loading dock. He was an older man, maybe 65, with careful eyes and a quiet way of moving through the building like he was part of the walls themselves. "Miss Clark," he said softly, glancing around to make sure we were alone. "I was in Stairwell B last night. I saw what happened." My breath caught. I'd thought we were alone in that stairwell, but apparently Mr. Alvarez had been on the landing below, emptying a trash bin. He pulled a small notebook from his shirt pocket, the kind he used to log spills, broken lights, and maintenance issues. He flipped to last night's date and showed me an entry written in careful handwriting. "Stairwell B, 10:42 p.m. He pushed her shoulder. She fell 3 steps. Checked she was breathing." I stared at those words, my vision blurring slightly. "Can I take a picture of this?" I asked, my voice cracking just a little. He nodded and held the page steady while I photographed it with my phone. "I keep good records," he said simply. "Always have." I thanked him 3 times before he nodded and walked away, pushing his cleaning cart down the hallway. The next morning, I logged into my computer and found something wrong. My access permissions had been cut in half. I couldn't open the payment dashboard anymore, the system I'd used every single day for 4 years. The queue management tools were grayed out. My administrative rights had vanished overnight. I called IT immediately. Brandon answered, and I could hear the discomfort in his voice before he even started explaining. It's a routine security rotation, he said, but his words came out too fast, too rehearsed. We're tightening access across departments. I didn't argue with him. Brandon was just following orders, probably from someone higher up who'd gotten a call from my boss. Instead, I thanked him, hung up, and immediately drafted another email. Access restriction implemented following protected incident report. Requesting documentation of authorization for permission changes. I sent it to HR, legal, and the IT director. I copied myself 3 times, work email, personal email, and a dedicated folder I'd created just for the situation. Paper trails don't forget, even when people try to erase you from the system. I could see the pattern forming now. Push her down, silence her access, make her disappear. During my lunch break, I sat in my car in the parking garage and called the company's anonymous compliance hotline. The number was printed on a poster in the break room, right next to the fire evacuation map. A woman answered on the 3rd ring, her voice professionally neutral. I took a breath and started from the beginning. The $59,000 transfer, the falsified documentation request, the push in the stairwell, the retaliation. I kept my voice steady and factual, the way I'd report a processing error. She listened without interrupting, typing. I could hear the keys clicking on her end. When I mentioned the audit trail and the security footage, her tone shifted. She became more engaged, asking specific questions about dates and times. "And you've documented all of this?" she asked. I confirmed I had. She gave me a case number and told me someone from the investigation team would be in touch within 48 hours. When I hung up, I sat in my car for another 5 minutes, just breathing. There was a strange calm settling over me, like I'd finally done something that couldn't be undone. I'd pulled the emergency brake, and now we'd see who got thrown forward when the car stopped. The calendar invite appeared in my inbox the next morning. Brief touch base, CFO, 2 p.m. today. 10 minutes, conference room C. My stomach flipped, but I spent my lunch hour preparing. I printed everything. The screenshots, the Slack messages, Mr. Alvarez's notebook entry, the urgent care discharge summary, the access restriction timeline. I organized it all in a folder with tabs and timestamps. At 1:58 p.m., I walked into the glass-walled conference room where Sharon Blackwood, our CFO, was already waiting. She gestured to a chair, her expression unreadable. I sat down, placed my folder on the table, and slid it across to her. "Everything's documented here," I said quietly. "Timeline, evidence, witness statements. If anyone touches the security footage or tries to delete it, I'll need that noted in writing." She opened the folder and started reading. I watched her face carefully. Her pen clicked once, twice, 3 times, a nervous habit I'd noticed during company meetings. After what felt like an hour but was probably 3 minutes, she looked up at me. "Understood," she said simply. "We'll be conducting a full investigation. You have my word that the footage will be preserved and reviewed." She closed the folder. "Is there anything else you need right now?" I shook my head. We stood, shook hands, and I left feeling like I'd just crossed some invisible finish line. By the end of that week, HR called me in for what they described as a routine follow-up conversation. 2 representatives sat across from me in a small meeting room, their faces carefully neutral. "We've received a complaint," the older one, Patricia, said delicately. "There are concerns that you've been overly emotional in public spaces, creating a disruptive environment." I felt my jaw tighten, but I kept my voice level. "Can you tell me who filed this complaint and when?" They exchanged glances. "The complaint was submitted anonymously," Patricia said, "but it raised concerns about your recent behavior." I pulled out my own folder. I'd started carrying it everywhere now, and laid out the timeline. The incident report, dated and filed, the access restrictions that followed, the compliance hotline call. "Here are the dates and times of every action I've taken," I said. "All of it documented and factual. No emotional outbursts, no disruptions. Just standard procedures for reporting workplace violence and financial misconduct." I watched them do the math in real time, their expressions shifting from professional concern to uncomfortable realization. They were looking at a clear retaliation pattern, and they knew it. Patricia's pen stopped moving. "Thank you for providing this context," she said quietly. "We'll note it in your file." The meeting ended 10 minutes early. That afternoon, Kara pinged me again on Slack. "You need to see this," she wrote, attaching a forwarded email. I opened it and felt my pulse quicken. It was a message from Grayson Industries, the vendor involved in the $59,000 transfer. The email was dated 3 days before the payment went through, and it was addressed directly to my boss, not me. "Per our discussion, we'll process the reroute for the $59,000 and keep this arrangement between us. Now, need to involve standard approval channels." I read it twice, then 3 times. This was the smoking gun. The email proved he'd made a side deal with the vendor, deliberately bypassing our financial controls. The payment wasn't a mistake. It was intentional, probably hiding something else entirely. I forwarded it to my personal email, then sent a careful message to Sharon Blackwood's executive assistant. "Additional documentation relevant to ongoing investigation. Please ensure CFO receives this." Within an hour, I got a reply. "Received. Added to case file." I sat back in my chair staring at my screen. The story he'd been trying to sell, that this was just a simple processing error, was falling apart. And he knew I knew it. The question was what he'd do next. The next morning, I found something strange on my desk. A small USB drive, black and unmarked, sitting right in the center of my keyboard. No note, no explanation. My hands hovered over it, but I didn't touch it. Instead, I called IT security. Brandon came down within 5 minutes wearing latex gloves and carrying a small evidence bag. He logged the time, photographed it in place, then carefully picked it up. "I'll need to check this in a secure environment," he said, his voice serious now. "Don't plug unknown devices into your computer. Ever." 2 hours later, he called me. "You were right to be suspicious," he said. "That drive had a document on it. A supposed confession statement using your name. But the metadata shows it was created yesterday from a computer in the executive wing, and the language doesn't match your writing style at all. Someone had tried to plant false evidence on my desk, probably hoping I'd panic and plug it in, or that it would be found during an investigation and used against me." Mr. Alvarez's voice echoed in my head from a conversation months ago. "Don't plug mystery into your life, Miss Clark." I'd laughed then. Now I understood what he meant. Every detail mattered. Every piece of evidence could be turned into a weapon. Finally, the email I'd been waiting for arrived from facilities. "Stairwell B security footage has been preserved per your request and legal's directive. Time-stamped copies secured in evidence storage." I read the message 3 times. Relief flooding through me. The footage existed. It was saved, and multiple people now had their hands on it. My boss couldn't make it disappear. The email also mentioned something I hadn't known to ask about: badge access logs. Apparently, every time someone used their ID badge to enter a stairwell after hours, the system logged it. The report showed his badge and mine both accessing stairwell B at 10:41 p.m., within 1 minute of each other. The timeline matched my incident report exactly. I was printing this email when I heard his voice in the hallway outside my cubicle. "Sometimes cameras glitch," he was saying to someone, his tone trying for casual but landing somewhere near desperate. "Technical issues, you know how it is. Can't always trust what they show." I didn't look up from my desk, but I felt him pause near my cubicle entrance. "Sometimes they don't glitch," I said quietly, still looking at my screen. "Sometimes they just show exactly what happened." I heard him walk away quickly, his footsteps loud against the tile floor. The following Tuesday, he called a mandatory team meeting. "Team realignment discussion," the calendar invite said. We gathered in the large conference room. Me, Kara, Brandon from IT, and 3 others from the finance department. He walked in 15 minutes late, and something about him had changed. The swagger was gone, his shoulders were tight, and his eyes kept darting toward the glass wall that separated us from the hallway. That's when I noticed the security officer standing outside, pretending to check his phone, but clearly positioned to watch our meeting. My boss started talking about workflow improvements and efficiency metrics, but his usual confident presentation style was missing. His hands shook slightly when he pulled up the slides. He kept losing his place and having to backtrack. At one point, he looked directly at me, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Fear. I'd learned a language he couldn't speak anymore. The language of documented truth. of evidence chains, of systems that couldn't be charmed or bullied into submission. When the meeting ended 30 minutes early with nothing actually discussed, everyone filed out in confused silence. The security officer followed him down the hallway. The external auditors arrived on Thursday morning. I'd heard rumors they were coming, but seeing them in the conference room with stacks of financial documents made it real. They were from Price & Associates, a firm that specialized in forensic accounting. I was called in at 11 a.m. They asked me to walk them through the payment approval process, step by step. I showed them the standard protocol, how every transfer over $10,000 required dual authorization, how the system logged every login, how timestamps couldn't be altered without leaving digital fingerprints. Then they showed me the batch file from the night of the $59,000 transfer. This was authorized at 11:47 p.m. from an executive terminal, the lead auditor said, her finger pointing to a specific line. Can you explain why this happened off hours, outside standard procedures? I shook my head. That wasn't my authorization. My login wasn't active that night. I have my home security system logs showing I was back at my apartment by 8:30 p.m. They nodded, making notes. Then they called him in. I was asked to wait outside, but through the glass wall, I watched him try to explain. He reached for confidence the way you'd reach for a railing in the dark, and came back empty-handed. The retaliation came swift and clumsy. Monday morning, an email landed in my inbox with HR's logo at the top. Notice of pending corrective action, insubordination. The message claimed I'd refused direct instructions from my supervisor and created a hostile work environment through aggressive communication. The timing would have been funny if my ribs didn't still ache when I laughed. I sat at my desk, reading the email 3 times, and then I did something simple. I hit forward. I sent it to compliance with my case number in the subject line. I sent it to legal with potential retaliation in the subject. I sent it to Sharon Blackwood's assistant. I sent a copy to the external auditors who were still in the building, and I sent one to my personal email with a note in the body. Document number 15 in ongoing retaliation pattern. Sent 2 days after external audit interview. Within an hour, my desk phone rang. It was Patricia from HR, her voice careful and measured. Please disregard that email, she said. It was sent in error while we conduct our broader investigation. It's been rescinded from your file. I thanked her and hung up, then updated my spreadsheet where I'd been tracking every action and counteraction. The pattern was clear as glass now. That afternoon, something unexpected happened. Security pulled additional footage I hadn't even known to request, a wider angle from the landing below stairwell B. The still image they showed me captured a figure at the bottom of the stairs, partially visible. Mr. Alvarez, standing with his trash cart, looking up at exactly 10:42 p.m. He'd witnessed the whole thing from an angle I hadn't known existed. They asked him to provide an official statement, and he agreed without any fuss, the same way he'd approach cleaning a spill. It just needed to be done, so he'd do it. His notebook, which had started as a simple maintenance log tracking broken lights and wet floors, had become something much more important. A lighthouse, I thought, sitting in my car after work. Mr. Alvarez kept records because someone needed to pay attention to the details everyone else ignored. His careful documentation of a moment he'd witnessed had become the kind of evidence that couldn't be argued away or reinterpreted. That evening, I drove to a grocery store near his neighborhood and bought a thank you card. I wrote simply, "Your attention to detail may have saved my career and my safety. Thank you for seeing what others missed." I left it with the front desk, addressed to him. He requested a private meeting on Wednesday. His email was brief. Need to discuss path forward, one-on-one. Conference room G, 3 p.m. I showed the email to Sharon's assistant and asked if it was advisable. She replied within minutes, "Security will be present. You're not required to attend, but if you choose to, you'll be protected." I went. He was already there when I arrived, sitting on one side of the long table. A security officer stood outside the glass door, arms crossed. I sat across from him, my folder of documents in front of me like a shield. He leaned forward, trying to make eye contact. "Tessa, I can protect your job," he said quietly. "If you just stop escalating the situation, We can make it all go away, put it behind us. The word escalating came out like a cough, like something stuck in his throat. I looked at him for a long moment. His face was tired, older than I'd ever seen it. But I didn't feel sorry for him. I felt clear. I don't need protection, I said, my voice steady. I need honesty, I need accountability, and I need you to stop pretending this is something I did to you. He opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. He tried one more time. As I stood to leave, he reached across the table, like this was all just a misunderstanding, two professionals smoothing out a wrinkle. Let's shake on it, he said. Fresh start. I looked at his extended hand and thought about everything that hand had done. Pushed my shoulder in a dark stairwell, signed falsified documents, tried to erase evidence. I didn't take his hand. Instead, I set my phone on the table between us, screen up, the voice memo app clearly recording, the timer counting seconds in red numbers. This is a record, I said clearly. Everything we say right now is being documented. If you have something to offer me, say it on the record. His hand dropped to his side. His face went through several expressions. Anger, shock, calculation, defeat. You're making a mistake, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. I picked up my phone, stopped the recording, and saved it with a timestamp. No, I said, walking toward the door. I'm making sure the truth is louder than the lies. The security officer stepped aside to let me pass, and I walked out without looking back. My hands were steady, my breathing was calm. I'd drawn every line clearly, and now we'd all live with them. Friday afternoon, the official announcement came through. HR sent a company-wide email. Please be advised that his name has been placed on administrative leave, pending investigation into financial and workplace conduct matters. I read it twice, sitting at my desk while the office around me buzzed with whispered conversations and shocked reactions. 20 minutes later, I watched through my cubicle wall as he walked toward the exit. He carried a cardboard banker's box with his desk items, a coffee mug, some papers, a framed photo. 2 security officers walked on either side of him, not touching, but clearly escorting. As he passed my cubicle, he didn't look at me. His face held the same expression I'd seen in the stairwell right after he pushed me, shock that consequences had arrived exactly on time. I didn't celebrate. I didn't smile or feel victorious. I just breathed, slow and steady, feeling the dull ache in my ribs that was finally starting to fade. Kara appeared at my cubicle entrance. You okay? She asked quietly. I nodded. I think so, I said. And for the first time in 2 weeks, I meant it. The weight that had been pressing on my chest since that night in the stairwell lifted slightly. The last loose thread unraveled the following week. Grayson Industries, the vendor at the center of the $59,000 transfer, sent a new email to legal. They were uncertain now about who had given them instructions for the payment reroute. They were walking back their earlier message, trying to create distance. But legal was ready. They produced phone records that showed a 3-minute call from his office extension to Grayson's finance department, placed at 9:34 p.m. the night before the transfer went through. 3 minutes. That's all it took to arrange a scheme that cost him his career. The external auditors delivered their preliminary report to the board. I wasn't allowed to see all of it, but Sharon's assistant shared the key finding: intentional bypass of financial controls, falsified documentation, pattern of coercive behavior toward subordinate staff. The language was clinical and exact. There was no gray area, no room for interpretation. The evidence formed a chain that couldn't be broken: the transfer, the phone call, the reroute agreement, his attempt to force me to backdate documents, the stairwell confrontation, and the systematic retaliation that followed. Every link was solid. Every piece of evidence pointed in the same direction. 3 minutes can change a life, I thought. His call changed his. My documentation changed mine. The settlement offer came through legal. They laid it all out in a conference room with Sharon present. Full medical costs covered, 6 weeks of paid time off, and a formal written apology from the company acknowledging that workplace violence occurred and should have been prevented. I read through the document carefully, taking my time. Then I looked up at Sharon. I want one more thing, I said. I want mandatory training on physical safety and financial controls. Not just for staff, for leadership. Starting at the top. The room went quiet. Sharon's pen clicked 3 times. She glanced at the company lawyers, who looked uncomfortable. That's outside the usual scope, one of them started. Sharon held up her hand. No, she said firmly. She's right. We failed here at multiple levels. If we're serious about preventing this from happening again, we need systemic change, not just a settlement check. She turned to me. I'll personally oversee the training program development. You have my word. She picked up her pen and wrote a note on the settlement document. Add it, she said to the lawyers. They nodded and made notes. I signed the agreement with steady hands, dated it, and slid it back across the table. We shook hands. Sharon's grip was firm and warm. Thank you for not letting this go, she said quietly. I just nodded. My last day before the paid leave started, I found myself standing in front of stairwell B. Someone had installed a new sign on the door. Door auto locks, cameras active, emergency, intercom available. The changes were small but significant. I pushed open the door and stood at the top of the stairs, looking down at the spot where I'd fallen. The concrete steps looked ordinary in the daylight, just gray slabs and a metal railing, nothing special. But they'd changed everything. I pulled out my notebook, the one where I'd been documenting the whole ordeal. Pressed flat in the back pages was the paper bracelet for urgent care, the one they'd put on my wrist when I checked in that night. Clark Tessa, fall injury, it read in smudged blue ink. I ran my finger over those words, then closed the notebook. I'd labeled it carefully on the cover in permanent marker. Never again. Taking a breath that didn't hurt anymore, I descended the stairs slowly, steadily, like a metronome counting time. 1 step. 2 steps. 3 steps. The same steps that had tried to break me 2 months ago. But I was still here, still walking, still standing. What tried to break me had become the reason I wouldn't bend. I pushed open the door at the bottom and walked out into the afternoon sunlight, ready for whatever came next.